Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of ScreenDaily Talks. I'm Michael Rosser, a contributing editor at Screen International, and today's session will cover the challenges faced by cinemas in the UK, which are starting to reopen after months of closures. To discuss this, we're joined by Phil Clapp, CEO of the UK Cinema Association, who led the publication of official guidelines around COVID-19 safety in cinemas. Also joining us is Allison Gardner, the CEO of Glasgow Film, which runs independent cinema Glasgow Film Theatre, as well as the Glasgow Film Festival. And we also have Crispin Lilly, CEO of Everyman Media Group, which has already begun reopening its venues nationwide. So to kick off, for the first half of the session, each member of the panel is going to talk about their own experience in terms of getting exhibition back on its feet. And then we would love to take some questions from you. What do you want to ask each of these panelists about the challenges facing cinemas? Please ask your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen rather than in the chat room. And my colleague and producer, Orlando Parfit, will moderate those. So on we go. Crispin Lilly, we're going to start with you, as you've already begun to reopen Everyman cinemas around the country. Can you tell us how business has been over the past week?
Yes, I can. I was just talking earlier and saying how pleasant it is to be waking up to a box office admissions report every morning for the first time in 4 months. I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that the numbers are definitely a lot smaller than they used to be. So we only opened 6 sites this last weekend on Saturday, the 4th, which was the first day in England we were allowed to. And we're opening a further 5 tomorrow. I think it's a combination. Look, the numbers are really small. Of course, they're small. And I think what we're experiencing is not dissimilar to what's been experienced in other territories across Europe, as and when they've opened, which is typically around maybe 85% below the norm. But that is higher than we had forecast. And for the venues that we've opened, it means that we are, it makes sense to be open, which is the important thing. So yeah, and I mean, it's been a delight both to be looking at real numbers, analysing real data, but also being in venues, seeing my teams again, and also seeing customers. And I think the response from our customers has been utterly delightful. I mean, they've been amazing. And the biggest thing for us is how happy they've been and how aware they've been of their role in the safeguarding piece, and happy to be managed appropriately as well in that regard, which was, one of our concerns. Is we've got a lot of different people out there with a lot of different attitudes to the virus and safeguarding, but it's been really smooth so far, touch wood.
And I mean, with Odeon sort of reportedly taking the decision to slow down its reopening plans, and Cineworld pushing back opening all its UK sites until the end of July, have your phased reopening plans changed at all?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no getting away from that. I mean, when we first announced about 3 weeks ago, Tenet was still slated to be releasing on the 17th of July. Seems a long time ago now. And the reality is, as I said, the 6 we've opened this last weekend were very well chosen. They were not necessarily larger, they're the ones the most efficient to open. And the 5 opening tomorrow. And we've got another 5 slated to open in probably 10 days' time. And we have slowed that down because we had originally a schedule to get them all open for Tenet. And there isn't that rush, and we can continue to get learnings. And one of the important things for us is, just the challenge in getting contractors out to fix problems. These places have been closed for 3-4 months. A lot of our Everyman venues, you may know, are old buildings. There's things that need to be fixed, and there's suddenly a real glut of demand on the time of contractors. So actually slowing the reopening in that regard makes sense. Slowing the reopening in terms of learning what works. I mean, we've been showing about 20 different films across the 6 sites that have opened this week, and massive learnings. I mean, our biggest film, bizarrely, has been Trolls World Tour. And so, again, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say that too many times because I know there's a lot of multiplex operators now probably just ducking off the call. But it's heartening for me that it's up there, but also that there's been such a strong return of family audiences. Because when we closed 4 months ago, there was that, and some of you may remember it in England, in the UK, it was that weekend where it was the second week of Invisible Man, and it was, I think it was this way, it was the second week of Invisible Man and the first week of Military Wives and onward. And by then, we all traded through that weekend. By then, we all knew that this was coming. You know, none of us would have thought we were all going to be closed for 4 months, but we all knew it was coming, and you could see it in the box office. But what was interesting was, you know, Military Wives and onward both massively underperformed. And you kind of think, yeah, older customers, family audiences, you know, why would they have come out and risked that? But Invisible Man, in its second week, had a really soft drop of only about 15%, which was really telling, because actually the 15 to 24, so the core market for that film, were just kept on going. So anyway, the reason I say that is because, you know, the two demographics that we were most concerned about coming back after the lockdown were the older customers, which, you know, we disproportionately over-index on, and families. So it's heartening to see that families are very much embracing it. You know, we've got Trolls, we've got Onward, we've got Jumanji 2, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog, and they're all doing very well.
Excellent. And
relative. They're all doing very well, relatively.
Yes, and you know, so many more you know, questions around lessons that you've learned and whatnot. But I'd really like to come to Allison Gardner. And it's been announced that Glasgow Film Theatre will reopen on August the 31st, so a little way off. I wonder, what impact do you think that these closures, in your case nearly 6 months, will have on independent cinemas?
I think it's going to be very, very tough for the independent sector going forward. I mean, I think that especially the smaller ones and those who are like ourselves, are not-for-profit making organisations, and I sort of think it might be 5 years before we're back on an even keel.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. It'll take a long time because the margins are so narrow in terms of how we work, and obviously we're making no profit for our organisation, and we put all the money back into our audience development initiatives. So it will be difficult to re-engage with those audiences around qualities, inclusion and diversity, for example, because there's difficulties around things, for example, the dementia-friendly programmes that we work with. That older audience will definitely not be coming back anytime soon to the GFT. And that's something we're going to have to put on hold, where we'd be doing brilliant work around that. So it is going to take a long time to come back. I think there is hope because the distributors have been holding back titles, because most of the independent cinemas will reopen late August, early September. So hopefully that cohort of distributors that usually work with us will keep their titles for us so that we can open all together around their titles. So for example, Home in Manchester, Watershed in Bristol, you know, Film House in Edinburgh, we're all opening roughly at the same time. So hopefully there's a momentum around that sort of second wave of openings.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, as an independent cinema without the benefits of an owner with perhaps deep pockets, can you talk about the challenges for cinema in terms of, you know, staffing, concessions, ticketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously at the moment we currently are paying all our permanent staff 100% of their wages, something that we're very proud of. So, and we've retained all our staff at the moment. Who to say that might change if situations change, there's a second wave, I don't really know, but at the moment that's the plan to continue. We have furloughed most of our staff, so currently there's usually about 5 of us working across the organisation and doing different things. So for example, next week I will be putting up posters at GFT announcing the reopening. Not sure many CEOs do that, but you know, all hands to the pump in this situation. And my team have been absolutely brilliant. They've been absolutely fantastic. Lots of innovative ideas, lots of people working. really hard. I think it is going to be very difficult. We have sent out a staff survey, for example, to all our furloughed staff to find out, for example, what it is they are concerned about coming back, so that I'm creating a plan around safety, but there might be some things that I hadn't thought about or that Phil hasn't mentioned, for example, that might be their specific concerns about our building, which was built in 1939. And in fact, this is the longest time GFT's ever been closed. It remained open throughout the whole of World War II, apart from 1 week when there was bombings at the Clydebank shipping yards, but the whole time it has been open. So it is quite sad.
Yeah,
for most independent venues.
Yeah, of course. Now, Phil Clapp, I mean, you've had the enormous task of overseeing COVID-safe guidelines for cinemas. Can you talk about the sort of feedback you've got since they've been published, maybe from the major multiplexes, you know, the Odeons and Views of the world?
Sure. So I mean, the context in which we worked with a significant number of our members, particularly the ops leads, the operations leads, to develop the guidelines, was one which was one based on an understanding that there are probably different routes to the same outcome, and that what might work for a big multiplex company may not work as effectively, for example, as venues run by Crispin and Allison. We sought to give clarity where it was necessary, but also to give some leeway. And I don't mean by being lax in terms of the safeguards, but understanding that different companies have different technological and financial capabilities. I think, and this is part and parcel of what Crispin said as well, I think one of the things we've been very pleased about, and this is definitely early days, is the feedback we've got from members larger and small in terms of their experience of those who opened at the weekend, is that customers understand the safeguarding, they appreciate the safeguarding, but as Crispin said, they also appreciate their role in the safeguarding. And we were we spent a lot of time thinking about the wording of the safeguarding guidelines to make clear that, you know, cinemas can take you to a certain place in terms of safety, but there is an expectation in terms of customers behaving appropriately and responsibly. And that's not going to happen in all occasions. And it may be that as we get further down the road, some of that is tested in terms of some of the cinemas that open. But I think, you know, we want to get that message out there that what the cinema sector, UK cinema sector when fully open, but cinemas in England currently, want to do is to make the experience as safe as they possibly can. There's no 100% guarantee ever in anything in life, but also to continue to make it an enjoyable and relaxing experience. And certainly one of the pleasing things we got back from the feedback was that it felt, you know, top line, people felt safe, but they didn't feel they were part of a process. They didn't feel that we were making the cinema experience overly clinical, overly medicalized. And I think that's the balance we've been trying to strike. As I say, we will learn as we go along, and I'm sure, you know, colleagues who are on the panel here and colleagues who are listening will learn as they go along in terms of the realities of delivering this. But I think, you know, notwithstanding the fact that box office was always going to be modest initially, we've got off to a very strong start, and we need to build on that. And, you know, with cinemas in Scotland potentially able to open from next week, and we understand cinemas in Northern Ireland able to open imminently, we need to tweak those guidelines because there are slightly different provisions in each of the UK nations, whether it comes to the social distancing measure or the attitude towards face coverings or food and drink, etc. But try to give us consistent a message and consistent an experience to the public as we can, to give them renewed reassurance and for them to be able to tell others that it's a comforting and safe experience. So, you know, lots to be done, but I think, you know, we have a solid foundation to build on.
And what's the word from Wales?
In general, the word from Wales is that we fully expect that there will be, it's been clear throughout this that each of the UK nations is travelling at its own pace when it comes to the virus and taking decisions, and that's the nature of devolved government. But we fully expect that cinemas in Wales will be allowed to open before the end of this month. And, we've been, part of the joy of this job for myself and other UKCA colleagues over the last few months is we've had a kind of four-way conversations with the Westminster government with regard to England, but with the Scottish government and the Welsh government and Northern Ireland executive, just to understand the kind of rhythm they're working to in terms of each of their own respective roadmaps.
But I think there's still issues to do with serving food and drink there, and might that impact when you open your Welsh site, Crispin?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I mean, I think for two reasons. One is clearly commercially, F&B is a massive part. It would completely change the metrics of when it would be viable to open anyway. But then secondly, and I would absolutely reinforce what Phil was just saying, which is the fundamental thing, safeguarding is a base. We have to do that. We should be doing that. We are doing that. But the most important thing for us, like Phil said, is you still need the cinema to be something special. You still need the cinema to be as close as is realistically possible to what it was before, because that is what people are craving. They've all been watching films for the last 3 or 4 months. They're not coming out per se to see a film. They're coming out to enjoy the cinema experience. And for that's different for 100 different people. There's 100 different, some people like the big popcorn, sometimes like the big Coke, some people want our burgers, some people want whatever it is, people want to do it, but they need to feel like they're being taken care of. And they need to feel like they're in a relatively normal atmosphere. That's what people are craving and that we really want to do. So especially for us, but to be honest, for any cinema operator, to not be able to give the full package of food and drink as part of that experience, there's no point.
And I mean, we actually heard yesterday about how UK cinemas will benefit from a temporary reduction in VAT from 20% down to 5%. I wonder, how has this been received by the exhibition sector? And do we know yet, Phil, if that's VAT on tickets as well as concessions? And maybe then to Crispin, if this will be passed on to audiences, savings.
So we know, thanks to a tweet from the Culture Secretary last night, that it will, officials didn't know, he did apparently, that it will include a reduction in VAT on cinema tickets. It will also include a reduction in VAT on, I'll say, certain aspects of food and drink, and it may be all aspects of food and drink, but we genuinely don't know at the moment. Colleagues in the Culture Department are still awaiting guidance from Treasury colleagues on that. But if we assume, and I assume we must, that the Culture Secretary knows the policy, then certainly that VAT reduction extends to cinema tickets as well.
Crispin?
Yeah, listen, I mean, at the moment, I'll be honest and frank, the intention is not to pass the savings on. And I'd only be saying that and saying that so emphatically if it wasn't for the fact that I believe that is what the government has done it for as well. I think they've been quite clear in saying this is about another lifeline to businesses to survive. Now, we all know, and there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests over the years that show a 10 to 20% discount on any product is not enough to stimulate real growth. You need to be talking about 30 to 50%. That's when you get real growth. So if we passed it straight on, it would do very little. I don't think people are choosing to come out to an Everyman or not to choose to come out to an Everyman this weekend based on the difference of whether our ticket is £14 or £12.60. I don't think that would make a difference. But to us, it's a major benefit again. And the government has done a lot, and we can always argue it could do more. That will enable us to consider keeping staff on furlough for longer. It will enable us to open more cinemas earlier because the threshold will come down. So, that's why I don't have any, I'm not shy in saying that that's what we're going to do, because it will make a big difference to that. I mean, it will mean I can take 15% less admissions and still make it worthwhile opening a venue. And I want to do that in as many communities as possible, because I really think cinema can be an important part of bringing a sense of recovery back to those communities.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've seen the government as well introduce this discount scheme to get people back into restaurants and eating out again. I mean, what do we think about like a similar idea for cinemas to get people back into theatres, some kind of initiatives to, really encourage and incentivize people to come back?
I think people are incentivized to come back. I think I would agree with Crispin. We're not intending to pass that on to the customers either. I think it is a lifeline to enable us to continue, to enable us to do all the good work that we've been doing over the years. I can't see a scheme that would really incentivize lots of the businesses, Crispin's business, the independent sector, the small community cinema. They know their audience and they know how to get them into their venues. So I couldn't see an overarching scheme that the government could come up with. I mean, I think for most businesses, the furlough scheme has been a lifeline for us, I think, in terms of keeping hold of that talented staff that we have. I think it's just going to be a long haul in terms of however your demographics are. So Crispin was saying that his demographics veer towards the slightly older. With the film festival, the Glasgow Film Festival, that has helped the Glasgow Film Theatre audience veer towards the younger, more sort of taking a chance audience. So I think you just need to know your audience and know how to attract them back into your venue. I think that's the key message. And they will behave well if you instruct them carefully and you're very clear about what you're asking them to do.
Sure.
Sorry, Mike, just to add to that, I mean, one of the joys of heading up the trade body for cinemas is that I don't get involved in pricing. But the actual statement made by the Chancellor yesterday and the document which accompanied it had the VAT cut in a heading under protecting jobs. So it's absolutely clear what the intention of government was in doing this, and all that Crispin and Allison said about, what is in the grand scheme of things on ticket price, a marginal change acting as an incentive, when in aggregate, that kind of reduction in VAT for cinema operators, given the volume of tickets, is a much bigger deal in terms of ensuring that the businesses that we're talking about have a future, essentially.
And I just want to remind people watching at the stage that we do want to take your questions as well. So please, if you do have questions for anyone, please put them in and we'll get to them shortly. But talking about that thing of getting people back into cinemas, I understand that there were plans for a sort of big campaign to get audiences back into the screens. Phil, can you speak to what might be happening around that?
Yeah, I mean, we work, the UK Cinema Association works increasingly closely with colleagues at the Film Distributors Association. And one of the things I will say, which has been a huge, not benefit as such, but which has made life, immeasurably easier during this period, is the closeness of the cooperation with colleagues in distribution, particularly the FDA. Coming together, we've been in discussion for the last 2 or 3 months now around some broad back to cinema campaign. And the kind of benchmark for that has been an ongoing survey which the Film Distributors Association have run for the last couple of months, actually, which takes a kind of fortnightly dip of attitudes around cinema and cinema going amongst cinema goers, so people who've been to the cinema at least twice in the last year. And what that showed pleasingly was a significant appetite for people to return. So it's a fairly steady number. 3/4 of people who've been to the cinema in recent times say they will return in the weeks following reopening. But also for those and others, an ongoing desire to be reassured as to the experience. So we're about to kick off actually very early next week. And we've been held back on this element because we've been waiting for the safeguarding guidelines to be finalized. And that was only 10 days ago. We're about to kick off early next week an ambitious and quite broad, kind of reassurance program through the vast majority of our members. And Crispin and Allison will know that yesterday we shared a range of assets with them which allow them to do that. And we need to give that time to kind of breathe and to take root, because I think if you try and combine a reassuring message with a kind of promotion of cinema message at the same time, things can get slightly confused. But then later in the month, and this also recognises, as you've said, that the cinema opening is going to be a staged affair. We will launch a more, I'm not saying more upbeat, but a more kind of in your face kind of pro cinema, back to cinema message, which we'll look to involve not just all of our members on, but also a broad range of cinema partners who equally have been very supportive during this. I think we almost can't talk about the safeguarding message enough, to be honest, but we need to be mindful of the fact that what will get people back into cinema will be a reassurance on them the continued safety and welfare of themselves and their families, but actually, the excitement and the buzz of the big screen. And it's trying to ride both of those horses and maintain a kind of sensible balance, which has been the real challenge for us, I think.
And I know that there are some questions coming in around the safety aspect and getting confidence back. So we will come to those shortly. But speaking about the FDA, the Film Distributors Association, I know that they had this library of 450 films that they compiled of sort of classic and contemporary titles. I wonder what the sort of pickup of that has been like. Crispin, are you cherry picking from that list?
Yes, we are in part. I mean, I think if you look at our films that we programmed this week and now over the coming weeks, and we're looking to program very much more now in strands. There's a fair mix. So I loved to egg the Trolls World Tour one, but there's a mix of films which were on release before. So you've got things like Onward, Parasite, Queen and Slim, 1917. And then we've mixed it in with things like Shawshank Redemption was number 2 this coming week out of 20 films, only just got beaten by those pesky trolls. So you've got Shawshank Redemption, you've got things like Interstellar, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker. So some more classic sort of library product. And then we've dropped in a few sort of more themes. We've got Queen and Slim in there. We've got Grand Budapest Hotel, etc. So some different strands that we're layering in. So it's a mix. And the fact that Shawshank did so well is really heartening. And there is a place for that whole look. If you're going to see a library film, you want to see a film that's right back. I mean, we're all waiting to watch Inception back on the big screen, aren't we? I don't think there's anyone that's not. I mean, it is, we know, we live the cliche. It is just so different up there. So it's picking those titles. And then, what we're starting to layer in from this week too is sort of the more popular, things like Grease, The Dirty Dancing, The Moulin Rouge, The Greatest Showman, which we didn't show this week, but I know some people did, to great admissions, again, all relative. And I think that's the thing, is it's a real mix. So having those libraries created, it's not so much that you'll be glad to know that, and Allison especially, but, our film team don't need the FDA to remind people what great films are, but it was the work that was done in corralling it and saying, these are ready to go. These have DCPs ready. They can be in your servers tomorrow or in a couple of hours even. That was what was great, because the number of times we sit and we make lists for a season, and you come up with 10 titles, and then you go and make all the inquiries, which is often 10 different inquiries, and actually only 3 of them are possible to come. That is what was brilliant about that list, is it saved a lot of legwork.
Absolutely. And I mean, alongside that, this almost seems like a perfect time for independent films, new ones, to be really benefiting at the time when the studios just aren't releasing new films. So I wonder, Alison, if you could sort of speak to the possible opportunity there, because I think in New Zealand, in France, in South Korea, they've been doing really well with domestic films. So yeah, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and just to echo what Crispin said, I mean, we do those types of titles all year round at GFT, so we have an inbuilt audience for those sort of classic titles. One of our most popular films every year than any other film, and I think Parasite only just pipped it to the post, was It's a Wonderful Life. So we already have that inbuilt audience who love to see those great films on the big screen. I think the things that will excite me when we get to Open GFT is bringing back those films that have been online, which we can now show in the cinema, which we would have shown in the cinema traditionally. So things like The Assistant, for example. I think those great titles still deserve to be seen in a cinema, and even though they've been online and people have been able to access them, I'm still keen to bring those titles back to GFT in a sort of curated season. So I think that's important. And we've been working a lot with modern films, for example. Yves Gaboreau has been fantastic. They've really bought into independent cinemas have the audiences for their product, and that sort of sharing model around virtual cinema has worked really well, and that's something that we hope we can continue around things like White Riot, for example. So those films have done really well. But again, I think people will still come back and see those on the big screen. So there's an opportunity for those online films to come back to the screen, and also for a really smart indie distributor to release really key stuff that they've been holding back in that sort of early September period. And I think because the studios, and we don't tend not to show studio films, for example, so we won't be showing Mulan, for example. They might move further back, and that really is around what happens in the States when they can show them. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the States. Things may get better. I suspect they'll get a lot worse before they get better. Just not saying who's in charge there, but nobody that can do anything good. So I think that those films will move back, and so there'll be a space, a breathing space for those great independent films.
Right, Mike, am I allowed to jump in? Are we allowed to make a plea of anyone listening? If
Yes.
anyone listening, it's 239 of you, if any of you are from a distribution who can pick up the UK rights to #Alive in South Korea, please, because if there's ever going to be a time to get that into our cinemas, it's going to be the next 4 to 8 weeks. And yeah, it needs all complicated stuff, apparently, like certification and dubbing and subtitling, but stuff I couldn't do. But get it into the UK, please, now.
Alison, as well, I wanted to ask, Crispin is beginning to open cinemas, and there are some opening, but you are preparing to do so. So I wonder, in that process, still close to a couple of months out, what you're finding to be the biggest challenges, and perhaps frustrations, difficulties as well, as you prepare to reopen.
I mean, we obviously were a little bit behind the curve in the sense that we were waiting for Nicola, aka the Scottish Government, we just use Nicola as a shorthand, Nicola to tell us when we could open. And because she presented the route map and we were in the same phase as schools, and they said that was going to be the 11th of August, we predicted it might be August, so we were working towards that date. The biggest difficulties I think we'll have is around the fact that the building was built in 1939. We don't have huge spaces. We don't have massive toilet spaces. I know I've spent an inordinate amount of time talking about toilets on every Zoom conversation I've probably had around reopening. But the toilets, I think we're pretty well versed in the sort of movement of people and the cleaning, etc. I don't have any worries around that because we move a lot of people through the Glasgow Film Theatre during Glasgow Film Festival. So we already have that sort of movement, and because we'll only be running at 20% capacity, then there's a lot less people to move around. One of the reasons we're opening on a Monday is I want to be there to physically see what's happening, see all the processes we've put in place, see that the staff are happy, physically be in the building to see what we need to tinker with, how we need to do it around a sort of less busy day. I mean, one of the things I thought was really interesting was the reopening of drinking in England, which you were able to go out drinking on a Saturday, whereas we reopened the beer gardens here in Scotland on a Monday, which seems like a much better idea because everybody wants to go out on a Saturday night, not so many people on a Monday night. So you need a little bit of time to ease yourself into it, ease the staff into it, ease the customers into it, and just get a feel for how it's going to work. So that's why we're opening on a Monday. But there are going to be a lot of problems, I think. So I'm just working my way through them. I was in the office on Tuesday, and I was just walking through as if I was a punter. It's great to be in the cinema. So fantastic. I mean, there was only me and one other person, but it was lovely. So I like to walk through as if I'm a punter and see where the bottlenecks might be, see how we would move people here. And that is really that sort of walking the walk, not just talking the talk, is really important to me to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's a question here from Deborah Shepherd. asking, what do the panelists think about the opportunity to be part of a hybrid release pattern for films? In other words, part physical, part digital. Seems to be working well for local cinemas in the US, whereby cinemas can benefit from revenue generated using their databases. It's happening on a small scale here, but might be an opportunity to virtually open some more independent sites, even if they're not physically able to open. Would someone like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, we created our own GFT player years ago just because it's really around access. It's not really about just being able to open in the cinema. It's about those audiences who can't make it to the cinema being able to access that same curated title. So we open a lot of films day and date online and in the cinema as well. So we don't have an issue around that. I think it's a really important way going forward. And we will work with lots of indie distributors to do that model going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pushing water downhill with this panel because Phil is going to completely abstain from any comment whatsoever on this subject, and Alison and I already do it. I mean, you know, my personal view is there's absolutely, you know, there's not two models going forward. You know, is it a simultaneous release or is it a 16-week window? It always was pre-COVID, in my view, an evolution that had to happen with both parties appreciating the other one's position and the threat to it. So I do believe there's evolution there, and I do think that, like in so many ways, COVID is accelerating what was inevitable in many walks of life. I do think we need to be really careful, and my plea, and I'm sorry, these pesky trolls are getting a lot of name checks today, but I think it does illustrate, and this is my warning to distribution, is, look, I have complete empathy with a distributor choosing in these strange times to make a decision to protect their own business and their own properties. We all have to, everyone has to, and choosing to take a title to PVOD, if that's the way that their studio can continue to survive and make future releases, of course, nobody's going to hold them up. But don't get carried away by the success of a title in these strange times and assume that's the new norm. But also don't just suddenly think it has to be binary, you know? And I'm sure that we would have been allowed to show Trolls simultaneously, but, you know, there are other things out there that, you know, we would love to be showing, you know, however successful. And I'm sure Disney Plus has really benefited from the screening of Hamilton at the weekend. But I would have paid 30 quid to go and see that show on the big screen. And, you know, I think most of us now know that streaming and theatrical, if you cut through all the posturing, you know, are virtuous. You know, there's a positive relationship there. And the fact that I could watch it on my TV, and I've got a nice TV and a nice sound system, but if I could have gone and seen Hamilton in an Everyman on Saturday night with the food, the drink, the sound, the picture, and crucially 50, probably only 50 at the moment, but 50 other people, it's a different experience. And listen, again, I definitely don't mean to pick on Disney specifically there, because it's an evolving world and they didn't even know anyone would be open. But just going forward, just don't think that it needs to be binary. Don't preclude theatrical, those of us that will show it, if you do need to make a radical step, take a radical step. And then longer term, it's, yeah, where will this evolve to? I'm sure we're all going to be in a very different place in 5 years' time to where we were 5 months ago.
For sure. Now, there's a question that's come in anonymously about face masks. They're asking, will UK cinemas be looking to enforce mandatory use of face coverings for cinema goers? And if they were to do that, how would you even implement that while allowing the audience to consume food and beverages?
So I'll take this. And clearly there is a kind of never say never about this. But at the moment, the approach on face coverings, let's use that word rather than face masks, the approach on face coverings differs, certainly between England and Scotland. When Scotland allowed retail to open a week or so back, there was a requirement for people going into shops to wear face coverings. I think I'm right. The position on face coverings in England, which is the one currently we have the most clarity on, is a position which has been agreed, and we've kicked the tires on it on a number of occasions with Public Health England, which is that within the cinema environment, there is no requirement on guests or staff to wear face coverings. Certain companies I know are asking or requiring their staff to wear either face coverings or face masks in the true sense of the word, and that's entirely their decision. And one or two companies are asking, I think maybe not requiring, but asking guests also to wear face coverings. But in terms of the guidelines we've been given by Public Health England, there is no requirement. Now that may change. You're hearing in the last 24 hours about, finding out new things about the virus and the way it's transmitted, etc. But that's the current position. We've had some, I'll be honest, we've had some criticism about that. But it's not, cinema trade body second guesses public health experts is not a look I'm going for, to be honest. And if Public Health England come to us and say, actually, from the basis of our understanding, we think we should change that guidance, we'll change that guidance. But at the moment, on the basis of public health advice, there is no requirement. We are about to, I think, see the advice for cinemas when they're able to open in Scotland, and that may be something different. And cinemas will, of course, follow that guidance in Scotland as they will in Wales and Northern Ireland. But at the moment, there is no requirement.
And it has been a sort of, major source of contention for many out there. If people have to wear them on public transport, then, perhaps why not in a cinema? Even if the science doesn't fully support it, might there be something about just the sort of the optics of it, the confidence that comes with it? Alison, I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
I think for public transport, the reason that we have to wear masks on public transport is because we can't really social distance on a bus.
Right.
It's the reason or the tube or the tram or whatever public transport you take. There's not the physical ability to do that because it might be busier than you thought. So that's why face masks are compulsory on public transport. Shops, I think, are compulsory from Monday. For customers to wear face masks, and I'm speaking as the mother of two daughters who are currently working in supermarkets because they are back from university, and they are staff members and they haven't had any guidance yet as to whether they have to wear face masks as the employees on Monday. So there's a lot of uncertainty around it. So I think because we will have social distancing in the cinemas, I think, and we're looking at face masks for the staff or face visors for the staff, then I think that it depends on what we're told that we have to do. If Nicola tells us that customers have to wear face masks, then customers will have to wear face masks at GFT. We will just abide by whatever rules that we are given, because that is the only way forward. I think they're looking at it carefully. I hope they're looking at it carefully. So we just really have to, it's a wait and see situation for us in Scotland.
So far in the days that you've been open, Crispin, have you had any customer feedback about that, or, people getting in touch to say, if that was the case, then, has there been any sort of public voice on it so far?
No, none from the public at all. We've had a couple of staff question it, and again, exactly as Phil said, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a virologist or second guess the advice we've been given. What I would say is that very, very early on in this process, when we started thinking, what does it look like, the immediate thing we went to was face masks. And actually, professional advice that we got independently said, look, there's a real risk with face mask, which is twofold. One is it actually gives people a false sense of security. And so it makes them more likely to break down the social distancing, exactly as Alison said. And secondly, actually, most people touch their face a lot more when they're wearing a mask than when they do normally. And again, what everything comes back to is the best thing, the most effective thing you can do is wash your hands regularly and keep your hands washed regularly. That's the highest point of contact and the most likely way you're going to transfer it to your face. So wash your hands regularly and sanitize stations. Yes. And secondly, and again, I don't know this for a fact, but if there might be something out there that's saying, look, for more people than not, having the mask on increases the chances of you actually bringing your hands to your face. So, as I said, I'm following the guidelines and will follow them to a letter, and not start second guessing advice of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a question here from Hayley Donaghy, who's asking, how do you foresee what's happening in America impacting release strategies for temple titles, and how do you plan on navigating that? I mean, in other words, with COVID being so bad in America still, and potentially pushing back releases many months, you know, how, are you considering what you're going to do if these big studio films just keep getting pushed back?
Do you want me to start? Do you want me to go and sort Trump out first? Is that what you're asking?
If anyone's going to do it,
that is definitely true.
Do you know what, Alison?
Thank you, Crispin. We don't show tentpole films, so it has very little impact on us. We're more tutorial around the areas that I mentioned before, that we always have been, so it won't have any particular impact, although it might have a positive impact on those more interesting smaller films if they keep getting pushed back. That's my thoughts.
Crispin?
I think that, you know, the short answer is I think there's an increasingly high chance that those titles are going to get moved back further. I mean, even if the US infection rates plateaued today, you know, you look in England, we reopened about 6 to 8 weeks, I think between 6 and 8 weeks after the peak that we saw. You know, so even if it plateaued today, and it doesn't look like it's going to plateau today in the US, you know, you add 6 to 8 weeks on top of that. That's assuming that Mr. Trump is pseudo-sensible with that delay. Lots of assumptions there. Then you're talking about a delay. I don't want them, and again, I'm very quick and very appreciative of the different scenarios that everyone's in, including global distributors. What I would say, though, I completely understand the desire to wait for a global release date. I totally get piracy. I totally get all those challenges, but I do think at some point, if you wait for a global release date, you could be waiting for a very, very long time. And I'm talking potentially 6, 9, 12 months if all these little jitters carry on going on around the world. And I think at some point there has to be a recognition that you are not going to realize 100% of the returns on those films that you were hoping to 5 months ago, just as we're now having to completely realign our expectations on returns on investments. So my plea again to studio chiefs would be, look at the global footprint, and if you think you can get to 75%, go for it, because that on its way will help start along the path. The other thing, though, that I fear, which is more a plea to other UK exhibitors, is, you know, Alison's right. You know, there are a lot of really good quality independent films, but there's also a lot of other, you know, choose my words carefully, it's mid-range titles, however you want to define mid-range, but box office potential, whatever, that can also make an awful lot of money in the UK and aren't quite as dependent on global release dates. Well, but even they are going to need to rely on the big chains to be open to maximize the return even in the UK. So my biggest fear is that, you know, Mulan and Tenet get put back to mid-September, and then the other big chains push their really opening date back to the end of August. And then those people move their dates back to, and we will be here forever. We will be here forever. And at some point, we all have to almost do our bit and lay down a marker and stick to it and fight through this and get an audience with such unified demand that actually then distributors have the confidence to keep their dates and get the flow through. And it could benefit those smaller films, and it could be a nice little positive unintended consequence.
Yeah, is that something you're hearing as well, Phil? Is there a sort of nervousness around this lack of US studio films, or what's the feeling?
There's nervousness around everything at the moment.
Of course.
I mean, I think the use of the word navigate in the question is quite an apposite one. I think, you know, there'll be a need for everyone to navigate what will remain a moving picture, but that doesn't mean that we need to be kind of passive and wait for things to happen to us. So, you know, the UK Cinema Association, to a degree, whatever voice it has, but UNIC, which is the European trade body, is increasingly making the point that Crispin made eloquently there, which is that we very much risk having a significant region of the cinema world, you know, 25, 26, 27% of the cinema world open and ready for business. And because of things that were completely outside of our influence elsewhere in the world, having not enough content, shall we say, to bring people back in. And there's a very real danger, and, you know, again, Crispin said it eloquently, that if we wait for all of the stars to be aligned, there may not be a European cinema sector to arrive at when we get there. So everyone's having to make, you know, and for the avoidance of doubt, you know, the studios and distributors have an absolute right to decide how they best release their films. But it's our job as a national, regional, or even a global kind of grouping of trade bodies to make that argument to the studios that if we do want to wait for everything to be aligned, we could be waiting a very, very long time. And what we will lose in doing that is much, much greater than, in the grand scheme of things, some marginal reduction in revenue around a particular title. So absolutely, you know, I think everyone's fears are crystallized by what Crispin said, is that, you know, the US will go, and Allison as well, the US will go in a certain direction, and we'll be waiting for content until that rights itself. And we need to ensure that within the thinking of colleagues at the studios, particularly at the top of the studios, there's an understanding that, you know, these are extraordinary times, and that what has stood us in good stead until recently, for however long a period of time these extraordinary times prevail, may no longer be the right solution. I absolutely understand that the move towards, you know, kind of global day and date has been driven by marketing spend, it's been driven by piracy and a range of other things. But without sounding too apocalyptic, and I'm now going to, we're talking about the survival of the sector here, and for which, you know, then piracy and marketing spend becomes a bit of an irrelevance, to be perfectly honest. So all of these things come together just in a need for us to have a sensible, structured conversation, you know, and for companies to make decisions which are clearly in their best financial interests, but in their best long-term financial interests, rather than short or medium term.
And further to that, I mean, you know, Alison talked about how it could be 5 years before, you know, independent cinemas get back to anything approaching normal. Crispin, I mean, you know, in your view, do you see it taking that long for the likes of Everyman? And Phil, what do you think about a time frame for those multiplexes?
Listen, I mean, first of all, I don't think anyone knows the answer to that. Absolutely nobody knows the answer to that. And I think, you know, I would be far more optimistic about that. I think if you talk about, you know, cinema and how historically it has overperformed in the face of adversity. So you go back the last 30 years, you look at 3 big recessions that the UK has had, and in every one of those years, cinema admissions has increased. And it's because people, everyone's heard me go on and on about this, crave escape. They crave the great value entertainment that cinema is. You know, the digital switch off is probably craved more now than ever before, 2.5 hours with your phone turned off. And I think there's a real chance that cinema can overcompensate. Yes, we know that there's 10 to 15% of customers, but I would say only 10 to 15% of customers that are saying they may never go to the cinema again. Well, I'm sure some of them will, but let's just assume they're all off. Well, you only need to somehow get everyone else to go 8, 9% more, and you've made up that gap. And even if, you know, we end up 5% down, that is not the death of a business or the death of a sector. And, you know, we'll continue to innovate and we'll continue to find other ways. You know, so I listen, again, with the caveat that I'm not a virologist, I don't know how this pandemic's going to play out. But if there is no major second spike, and if we continue, however slowly, on a recovery curve, you know, I would really hope that this time next year that we're in a good place. And that's, you know, that's the confidence we all have to have. And to be honest, you know, we have to do that. And there's a mindset, both in a national psyche, a global psyche, national psyche, but certainly a corporate psyche. And I'd say at a personal psyche, that we have to start looking forward and and getting there. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Phil, is that the sort of message and mood that you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I equally wouldn't like to hazard a timetable or a timescale to the recovery of the sector, and then you get into discussions of what recovery means essentially. But I think that we should be, it's very easy, having been essentially in lockdown for 16 or 17 weeks, where this has been just a relentless, kind of treadmill of worrying about what if. It's very easy to forget the position we were in before the lockdown. Q1 of 2020 was 20% up on 2019, which was one of two best years in the last 50 years in terms of admissions. We're not coming from a position of weakness in terms of the business. There are a whole range of factors which are outside of our control. What's happening in the US and various other things. So in order to focus our energies as best we can, we need to, kind of focus on what we can influence. And that's about ensuring that we're, when I say we, I'm talking clearly about the UK cinema sector more broadly. We're delivering, when we reopen, the best, most reassuring, as safe as it can be experience. We're promoting that. We're almost inviting people to tell others about how good that experience has been. And we can influence that essentially. Bigger tables will influence other things, but I'm by nature, although my colleagues may not believe, I'm by nature an optimist, and I'm optimistic about our ability to come back from this. But that's not to say that that unalloyed joy will be shared by everyone, and it's clear, to Alison's point, that there are some subsectors of the cinema kind of sector which will have a particularly challenging time. So that's a reason why, while we await the detail, the recognition of smaller cinemas within the package of measures announced by the government at the weekend was a welcome recognition. And in the time I've been doing my job and doing the job I was before in government, I've never seen cinemas singled out within that kind of package. So there must be something there which is worth supporting, or we wouldn't have got the money essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, Mike, can I just jump in and just say the thing I'm thinking about is that obviously the smaller cinemas, more independent cinemas, the community cinemas, they run on goodwill and people doing stuff, and all that, I think, dissipates quite quickly, especially over this difficult period. So it's hard to keep up the momentum. So for me, I was thinking, I know audiences will come back within probably the time frame that Crispin just outlined, but I think that their ability to function will take up to 5 years to get back to where we were. So that was really, get back on that even keel was really what I was talking about, less about the audiences and more about the organisations that are really on the brink. Those sort of smaller community cinemas that are supported, say, through the Film Audience Network, through the BFI, etc. There's a lot of work, I think, needs to go into that to bring back those community cinemas, those smaller film festivals, etc., because they're enriching their own communities in a different way, especially in Scotland, because we have a very difficult geography in terms of cinema. So that's really what I was thinking about. But yeah, I'm also an optimist, Phil.
A question from Adam Daughtry here, asking that if it will take 5 years for independent cinemas to return to financial stability, does that mean, something of a pressure for more mainstream commercial programming and less for smaller, more cultural films? Alison? I
think that I have a slight concern that people may just go for get the big bang for your buck titles, the Bonds, etc., just in order to fill their coffers. The problem is probably how long the social distancing measures are going to be in place in cinemas. That's really the sort of crux of how that will be. We've talked about all we're putting them in place, and we're safeguarding audiences and staff, and we're looking at how this can be the new norm, but nobody said when that new norm's going to end, when we can start earning money again, because that capacity is just break even for most places. That 20%, that's not going to make money for hardly any organisations, I think. So I think that there will be a tendency for people to show a sure thing and perhaps take less of a chance on those more interesting or difficult or perceived difficult titles.
You know, Crispin or Phil, is there, can you understand that, you know, there might be some thought out there that to fill the screens with Bond or Wonder Woman or Tenet, just to kind of fill those seats as best you can, get that, you know, get those revenues back up, which might be at the detriment of smaller independent films? I mean, is there a danger of that?
Oh, it's a problem that I'm yearning to have that choice. Listen, I have always said, and I think what's always been wonderful about Everyman is that we have always programmed each and every cinema to the audience it serves. We don't try and preach, we don't try and educate, and we have individual cinemas that can play some of the really more, if you like, interesting independent stuff really well, and others that just would die with it, and can show Fast and Furious. And what I've loved about working for this business is we don't judge. You know, whatever you want to see, come out to the cinema. And actually, if you come out to cinema 3 times a year to see Fast and Furious, 50 Shades of Grey or whatever, which some people in this industry might frown upon. Well, if you come out to see stuff like that 3 times a year, then I've got a chance of getting you back a 4th and a 5th time, maybe to start expanding and realizing that a broader breadth of film out there. The key thing for me is that cinema survives, and I really don't mind what they come back to see for the next 12 months. The main thing is that we have a thriving cinema industry in 12 months' time, and that people want to see film. And, you know, I want to see smaller, more interesting independent films survive just as much as the next person. And the more people watch film, the more films like that have a chance of finding audiences. So it's a mutual, listen, if Bond comes out when Bond comes out in early November, you know, if for 2 weeks we just fill every one of our screens as much as we're able with Bond, brilliant. And I'll throw trailers on for every little interesting awards thing that's coming up through December and January as well, and try and get them back. The main thing is, if that's the challenge I have, I'll be delighted.
I mean, the thing I'll say is that, you know, having said about the strength of the foundations of the industry, which I absolutely believe, one of the things which the current situation has shown, I think, is the vulnerability of not just the UK sector, but actually those territories in Europe which are heavily reliant on US product, because we never thought that tap would be turned off, and now there's a likelihood, I would say, not more than that tap will be turned off due to things which are far beyond the influence of anyone in the UK. So I think it's not an immediate fix, because these things never are, but there's a discussion to be had about the kind of medium and long-term vision of the UK cinema industry, and whether a more, I use the word inadvisedly, a more balanced film slate, which, you know, kind of course takes the big films such as the ones that Crispin has mentioned, but also does find space for and encourage a broader range of British content, where, you know, God help us this to happen again, and you know, we wouldn't be as reliant on content over which actually the distribution of we have little, I wouldn't say no, but little influence. So I think, you know, there is, and that's probably almost a kind of contrary view to Allison's, which is, you know, kind of to a degree, you know, I think what may come out of this is a slight, you know, kind of realignment in terms of how we think about film content, and potentially, to Crispin's point, hopefully find more space for the non-mainstream, however you want to characterize it, film.
Mm. And you know, a follow-up to that from Grant Keir here is, you know, is this where the hybrid physical virtual releasing model can really help small independent films, you know, whether dramas or documentaries? Crispin?
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. And again, I'm going out on a limb here. One of these days, people are just going to kick me out of this industry. But, you know, there was a little film released last year called The Irishman that we're not allowed to say too much about in terms of how it performed. Suffice to say, I think it ended up being screened in about 100, 150 different cinemas across the country, and Everyman were part of that. And all I will say very carefully is that the success of that release really should be, I was going to say shouted about, really should be understood and analysed, because I think it was an important message for how the two, for the right film, and we're talking about a smaller film that was probably never going to have more than maybe a £6 to £10 million audience if it had a full release, but how a smaller film could be carefully brought to market in a different way and work successfully, I would say. And I don't want to prejudge how Netflix would define success, but I think that was really, really interesting. That's all I'm going to say on that. But there's got to be movement. And where I would be the first to say that with the 15, 20, 30 million pound blockbusters and above, there is a value to both distribution and exhibition of holding on to a significant theatrical window. It serves both parties. But as I said to you earlier, there's an infinite number of variations in between that could collectively be brought into the market and grow the overall pot. But again, when you make a transition like that, as much as we have to look across the distribution and respect the upfront investment that they put into a film in marketing and the high risk, which makes 16-week windows on certain films seem really punitive, they have to recognize that as exhibitors, we're putting £2, £3, £4 million a pop into a building, into the grounds of a 25-year lease that we need to protect. And, those are the things, that's the model that both sides need to understand and appreciate, why you get such intransigent positions. But there is stuff already going on in the middle that Allison will be well aware of, that I'm well aware of, and certainly 150 other screens last year were well aware of, that is interesting enough that we should be exploring in some way.
Absolutely. Phil, what's your take on that?
Part of the joy of my job is I don't need to have a take on that.
Fair enough.
One of the only joys of my job, actually. No, I think it's very easy, and part of the last 3 months has been picking up having the phone picked up to me by journalists on a regular basis who say, but surely all films are going to video on demand. They're not, essentially, and the fact that we can name those films that have significant titles that have, probably, and count them on the fingers of less than two hands, suggests that there is something fundamentally right with the business model which observes a theatrical window. And I think, if we can take any confidence from what has happened over the last few months, it's the fact that, not out of the kindness of their heart, but because it makes hard economic sense, colleagues in the studios have held films back until such time as cinemas are open to show them. Now, that clearly is a double-edged sword, because they're holding them back until such time as sufficient cinemas can show them, and that's not necessarily working to our advantage at the moment. But there is a discussion to be had, I think, about that middle ground. And, Crispin inevitably put it more eloquently than me, but I think no one underestimates the challenge that an inflexible window, were it to be there, might present. But I'll say I've been in the job for 14 years now. When I came into the job, and I think both, without sparing their blushes, Crispin and Allison were both somewhere around in the environment. The instruction to me was that if anyone attempted to release a film of any note with a window of less than 100 days, it was my job to start, kind of priming the muskets and lighting the torches, essentially. It's a very, very different world now. And there isn't that single monolithic window. There is much greater flexibility. Is it as much flexibility as colleagues in distribution would like it to be? Probably not. Is it as much flexibility as colleagues in exhibition would be willing to put up with? Probably not. But actually, there is that much more diverse business model now. And what we're seeing with the arrival of streaming as an additional kind of revenue stream is a further realignment of that. But the basic idea that, colleagues in the studios and distributors, here he says, talking on their behalf clearly, recognize that when they sell a film into cinema, they get, a cut of a ticket price for everyone who sees it. And when they sell a film into the home, they have no control whatsoever over the revenue that they get per eyeball. Essentially, that's a fundamental economic truth of the business, which no amount of stirring by media journalists and others is going to change, to be honest.
Cool. So we've got time just for one more question. And that is really just to get each of your sort of key lesson or takeaway that you've taken from this crazy period. What's a sort of, key takeaway essentially that you've formed as a result of all this? Let's start with Crispin. Can you talk about, like, from when you started reopening, a major lesson that you could perhaps pass on to other exhibitors who are looking to reopen?
Oh gosh.
Save the hard ones for last.
I want to say, sorry, I'm going to say, it sounds really cliche and naff, but have confidence in your teams. My teams have been stunning and amazing, and not only have put up with a huge myriad of different experiences in a lockdown, some of which I can only completely and utterly admire their tenacity in doing that, and then have bounced back to a completely different work environment to what they've ever been used to, and just got on and gripped it as brilliantly as they always have done, and are chomping at the bit. So, I suppose part of what I hope I contributed to them coming back and being maybe realistic was, a lesson that I heard on a webinar about 6-8 weeks ago, which was beware the lag, which is most of us as senior execs in businesses have worked through this, and we did the whole massive off a cliff. And then we had that moment of acceptance, and it was a change curve we went through. And then we've slowly grown to realize the new norm, so that actually this weekend, opening to numbers that 6 months ago would have been a disaster, I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is brilliant, I'm open. People who've been on furlough for 3-4 months have been living a different, completely unrelated norm, whatever that was. And there was always this danger that when they come back to work, they think, yes, we're going back to work. And their expectations was work of 4 months ago. And they would have to go through that change curve in a matter of days, if not weeks. And that could be really, really telling on them and their personal well-being. So we talked a lot about that and re-engaging people soon and getting them, without being too down and pessimistic, getting them to understand what that new norm is going to look like, so it doesn't break them on day one.
Allison.
I would echo what Crispin said. My team have been fantastic. Everybody's worked incredibly hard. We finished Glasgow Film Festival on the 8th of March, so just under the coronavirus wire. Had the Monday and Tuesday off, and then came back Wednesday and realised the whole world had changed while I'd had 48 hours sleep. So I think, as Crispin says, you've got to look after your staff. Something I do talk a lot about is we have paid all our staff 100% of their wages, our permanent staff, and something we're very proud of, to try and keep people. You do need to also trust your audience. Our audience have been very generous. Lots of people have been paying and donating the price of a ticket and a coffee because they come every week to GFT, so they've been donating that. So trust your audiences. Be kind to yourself. Try and take a tea break, I have to tell myself occasionally. And I am absolutely over Zoom so much. I'm so over Zoom. The first couple of days I thought it was, it's so exciting, I could do all my meetings like this. Now I'm so over it, and I just want to see people face to face.
And Phil, just some final thoughts.
So really to echo much of what Crispin and Allison have said, the thing, I think I already knew this, but the thing which has come through to me in the last 3 months is how brilliant the people in the industry are. And I we often talk about the industry as being kind of exhibition and distribution, but there's a whole ecology of people out there, screen advertising, technology, concessions, who have, kind of really taken an interest in the troubles we've been having, as it were. And that's hugely appreciated, and I think it just emphasizes the collective strength we have. We all clearly hope to get back to whatever normal is as soon as possible, but I think and I hope we'll have a a different appreciation for each other. And I mean that in a positive sense. Once we're on the other side of this than maybe we did have before. And one thing I can say is that I told you the opening of cinemas in Northern Ireland was imminent. It's just been confirmed they're opening tomorrow. So you can't get much more imminent than that, I would say.
There you go. So for those who stayed to the end, you heard it here first. So that's a great positive note to end on. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to talk to us today. And thank you all out there for watching. I hope we've covered all of your questions, but always feel free to contact us at Screen Daily if you feel there's anything we've missed or you'd like to hear us explore more topics. So this discussion will be available to watch in full on ScreenDaily.com from tomorrow morning, and we'll be announcing our next Screen Daily talk very soon. In the meantime, stay safe and look forward to seeing you all very soon, hopefully maybe in the cinema. Until then, thanks a lot.